So thank you very much to be here and to answer some questions we would like to do. And we had 1st of May this beautiful map, a world map from Geoengineering, and you showed here's president from EPC Group. And you explained that's the first step, because not all what they are doing is now known, because a lot of geoengineering trails are not publicly known. So I would ask you a little bit, what did you want to show with this map?
Well, we're alarmed at how rapidly the idea that you can be allowed to manipulate planetary systems has moved from being science fiction to being a scientific discussion to being suddenly a political debate. And it seems that as governments have the failures of Copenhagen on climate change, and Cancun on climate change, and Durban on climate change, more and more they say, well, don't worry. There's a technological fix, a technological solution that will solve the problems. So we don't need to worry about having our people take the bus. We don't need to worry about having our economies change to become green.
Change lifestyle.
Yeah, change lifestyles. All we need to do is have a technological solution.
Yeah.
And that takes care of it.
Yeah. And you are telling here is hotspot.
Yeah.
Region. What does it mean?
It's where there's a lot of work going on, where the governments are giving financial support to research in geoengineering,
yeah.
where parliaments or congresses are actually debating the idea of geoengineering, and where the scientific organizations are saying that they want to conduct large-scale experiments.
Large-scale, and what type, for example?
The one that we're most worried about is what's called solar radiation management.
Yes.
And what that is that you find a way to block the sunlight.
Yeah.
So if you can reduce the sunlight by 2%, or not 2%, less than 2%, yeah. You can get a reduction in temperature. Yeah. And so that postpones climate change. Yeah. It doesn't stop it, it just postpones it. And now we see Russia is talking about doing their own experimentation very seriously. The UK just a few days ago abandoned an experiment because of the pressure, public pressure against them. Yeah. The United States still is actively looking for projects to test. Yeah. So NASA in the United States is open to say, we will fund experimentation like this. China, we think, also is on the verge of conducting their own experiments. We hope not, but we think they might.
Mm-hmm. And what does it mean, this is hot spots?
Because that's where it's most likely that we'll see the first big experiments.
And they are just making small experiments?
So far, it's just computer tests.
Computer?
Yeah, they do computer simulations. They may do work in the lab. They'll do contained weather in contained facilities, but they haven't done open air experimentation. The problem with experiments, I mean, it sounds like you should say, you should be allowed to do experiments. Why not? But the problem with geoengineering experiments is we're talking about the planet. We're talking about planetary systems. Yeah. And you can't have a small experiment because you don't know anything. You have to have a very big experiment. So you take tubes and you run the tubes across the temperate zone to blow sulfates into the stratosphere, like a volcano. What happens, all experiments so far, all the computer simulations so far, show that the Asian monsoon goes below South Asia and it causes havoc in sub-Saharan Africa. So you have drought in South Asia and you have famine in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, it's fine for here. My country, Canada, will be okay. Italy will be okay.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
You don't know.
We don't know for sure.
You had the occasion to make before there was not another Earth with which test.
To compare, exactly.
It's the first time, and it will be the result. We don't know.
Yeah.
What about weather modification in all this area? Because, for example, we know very well in China and in Russia,
Sure.
all the world knows now they are doing, but usually in Europe or in America they don't tell about it.
There's lots. They tell about it often, but it's mostly they're smaller tests.
Yeah.
But we've had the United States, for example, in 1969, they went to the Philippines and they did weather, tried to do weather modifications throughout the entire Philippines. And the people had no idea. They did the same in Bihar in India in 1965, 66. When there was famine there, they tried to see if they could modify the weather. And they did the same in Pakistan, did the same in Laos and in Vietnam. The thing that's so attractive for the industrialized countries is that they don't need the United Nations. They can say, we don't need to have a consensus agreement in Copenhagen. All we need to do, or the government say, is we need just the United States by itself, or the United States perhaps with the agreement of China and Russia. Together we say, okay, let's do a test. And they can do it on their own soil, blowing sulfates into the stratosphere from their own land, and there's no need for a multilateral agreement by other governments.
So there was, in Nagoya, there was the moratorium from the Organization of the United Nations. What does it mean for the nations, this kind of agreement now? Because nobody told about it. The mainstream didn't told about this moratorium.
Well, it was in some places.
What kind of meaning has it now for the governments of the single nations, this moratorium?
It's weak, for sure. But the moratorium was tested 2 weeks ago, well, May 5th in Montreal. The UN Convention on Biological Diversity had a meeting of its scientific subcommittee. The scientific subcommittee had geoengineering to debate. It was all of the governments, 193 governments. So they went back and reviewed the decision of 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, and they supported it and strengthened it again. So every time the nations come together and they reinforce the moratorium, it becomes stronger. The problem with the Biodiversity Convention is that the United States is not a member. There are 193 countries that are members, and only the United States, the Holy See, and Andorra are not members. The Vatican and Andorra are not members.
Vatican and the United States and Andorra.
Yeah. So, in a way, the United States doesn't have to obey. That's why I think we see now that the U.S. government is putting up money for experiments. So we say the issue has to go to Rio, and governments in Rio need to, as all the governments of the world together, say no geoengineering experimentation. There's a ban against this.
I know he was in Mainz now. There was a symposium some days ago, and there was also David Keep, who is now a big promoter to put not sulfur but aluminium in the atmosphere. 1 day or 2 days after they blocked the SPICE project. Could you tell a little bit about the climate of scientists which are discussing now the situation of manipulating globally the atmosphere?
We actually had, the announcement by the British government was while we were in Mainz. And in Matthew, what's his name? Walker, no. The man who was in charge of the SPICE experiment was also with us that day. They're mad about it.
It was a consequence of a symposium?
No. The real decision, just a bad luck by the British government. I think the real decision, the reason the British government made that decision was because this past Monday in New York, we had a debate in the General Assembly on geoengineering. And I was invited by the General Assembly to present to them about geoengineering. We presented the map. And it is part of the actual text for negotiation in Rio. So that's, I think the British government wanted to get rid of the SPICE project before that negotiation began. That was their decision.
What do you think about the projects from Caldera and Keith? And they are sponsored by Bill Gates,
they're sponsored by Bill Gates. Bill Gates has given them $4.5 million, which is nothing. For Bill Gates, that's pennies.
That's nothing, but it means he is interested in the work they are doing.
Yeah.
And David Keith, since 20 years, is looking for this kind of manipulation of the atmosphere, because he's spoken about it just 20 years ago. Now he's speaking about aluminium instead of sulfur, and I think you heard him in mines. How is the situation?
Well, and he also, to be honest, he also got another $3.5 million or so from Gates, separate from the $4.5 million, which he gives out as grants, kind of. So there's more money, you're right. It's strange. What they constantly say is that they have no choice. We need this plan B because governments aren't doing enough. And they're quite right, governments are not doing enough. That's true. But at the same time, I mean, governments have behaved so, what do you do? I mean, you have governments acting like sociopaths. And you don't give a sociopath a bigger gun. And to say to the United States, which has denied climate change for years, refuses to do anything about climate change, to say, well, but it's okay. You can go ahead and blast sulfates into the stratosphere, or aluminum foil into the stratosphere, is simply insane. I mean, has there ever been a time, we've asked ourselves this question, has there ever been a time in human history, any time, when governments have acted on behalf of the planet, wisely on behalf of the planet, in an economic crisis, in a military crisis, in an environmental crisis, in a health crisis? They never act on behalf of the planet. So will they take an untested technology and use it safely?
Keith is very conscious about the consequences, because he said it will be a free riding on the health of our grandkids. So he knows it very, very well what they start or want to do or wish to do. No?
But they all say the same thing, and they all want to do the experiments.
Yeah, but that, since there is global change or global warming and CO2,
sure,
they stopped to speak about pollution, about lifestyle, about all these things. So it became a fixed point. No?
No, I mean, I don't, these are not monsters. These are not terrible human beings. But I think they have an unreal sense of politics. They don't understand that the moment geoengineering becomes an acceptable possibility, then all of the industrialized countries go to that rather than to do the hard work of changing their economies.
But there are the big lobbies now which like to have this kind of scientists like leader.
Sure. So they would much rather have these kinds of scientific initiatives than change manufacturing practices.
Because the atmosphere, we have only one. If it collapses, there is no others.
But there are the solutions. There is cutting back on greenhouse gas emissions, doing the job. Secondly, there is an adaptation to it. Because we know there's going to be change. No matter what happens, agriculture is going to be in trouble. There's many ways in which we can strengthen agriculture so we have food for the rest of the century and the next century. We're not doing those things. And the more we try to use this as an excuse, as a quick fix to our problems, the more likely we are not to do those other things. So I think the politics of the situation are just that. There's this assumption that Caldera and Keith have that they will be listened to, that the politicians will listen to them and say, oh, okay, that's how we should do it. Oh, we shouldn't do that. Okay, we won't. We'll do this. But you know, can you just guess what would happen now if this next few months there's a hurricane that's moving towards Miami, a huge hurricane, and Obama wants to win the next election, and he doesn't want to lose the vote in Florida. And the public knows that there is a geoengineering technology that can maybe stop the hurricane or change the direction of the hurricane. Obama would use the technology, even if it meant destroying Cuba. he would use the technology because he does not want to lose the election. And if Putin in Russia thought that the permafrost was melting underneath the cities in Siberia, and the naval bases and other military bases were about to sink away, would he use geoengineering to protect that? Even if it jeopardized the monsoon in Asia? He would. And when if China was having a drought in western China, and their government was afraid of being overthrown by the people because of the drought, would they use geoengineering? They would.
So a political instrument.
Yeah.
Also for water management, because weather modification and water management is connected now.
Absolutely.
Everywhere where they are starting to create dams and water energy and so on, they are doing water modification, rain enhancement.
Effectively, they are
from Indonesia to Mississippi to everywhere.
Okay. So these are once the geoengineering tool is accepted as being a possibility, these governments will use it.
So it's a very, very strong political, also military instrument in this moment.
It is.
Because it's also, we have the General Mooney in Italy, he said, they did it in Kosovo, they did it in Vietnam, and it's an instrument to make also war.
Yeah. And there is a treaty against that. There is the Environmental Modification Treaty. It was passed by the United Nations. And Russia and the United States and Britain and Germany and Italy have all signed that treaty. But it says you can't do geoengineering for military purposes. But it's a very fine line between when it's a military purpose and when it's just has bad effects on your neighbors.
You know Rosalie Burton?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure, because she appreciates very much your work. She has a very high opinion from your work. And she has got ultimately the Nobel Prize like you 1 year later. And she is very, she has written a very important book, Hacking the Earth, some years ago. And she is convinced that what they want to do to inject in the atmosphere particles of aluminium, they are just doing it, and it's also probable because I cannot imagine that they will cure the earth altogether without having first trials, tests. You know? So I suppose that Rosalind Burton sees very well what is happening. Small here, small there, small there, small there, but they must do it before. They cannot start globally in 1 month to do it all. They must look what will happen in a scale.
Yeah, I like her a lot, and I admire her work a lot. I don't think that's entirely true. Partly because where she's told me there are experiments going on in sky. They're over cities like Singapore. One time she actually told me, well, they're doing it right now over Singapore. Well, if you're doing those kinds of experiments, you do it in the ocean. You do it somewhere where no one is. You don't do it over populated areas. It doesn't make sense.
We know from atomic tests they did.
They did it here.
No, in Australia, for example, they did. Today we have strontium in the bones of the
Sure, absolutely. But the experiments were done.
And the fallout is everywhere.
Yeah,
absolutely. They do there and night and when they want to, but at the end the work is one.
Sure. Oh no, I agree with that. But what I don't agree with is that these trails from aircraft don't make sense when they're over Singapore or Seattle. They make sense if they're over the ocean. The pollution goes everywhere. The contamination
like
goes
Fukushima, we have it everywhere.
Yeah, sure. But there were 459 atmospheric nuclear tests in the Pacific. 459. Yes, the contamination went everywhere. But they weren't stupid enough to do it over Seattle.
It's not the point where are they doing, because, for example, 2000 atomic tests, it doesn't matter where they are doing it. It
goes everywhere.
One world.
Sure. But the argument
and the consequence are for the whole world.
Absolutely. But the argument being made by chemtrailers is they're saying that these tests are going trails. The tests they have already are Mount Pinatubo. In 1991, Mount Pinatubo exploded in the Philippines. And they have that test to see. They have those kinds of experiments that show what the impact is. I think they're quite right that they know it will work. They know they will have climate change. What they don't know is how it will affect the planet. And you don't do that by little experiments over cities or anywhere. You have to do that, large scale enough to affect the planetary systems.
And if they will do what David Keith has told, to put thousands of tons of aluminium and inject the atmosphere, and the moratorium in Japan, in Nagoya, gave permission to make small trials.
Small trials.
Not a large. In America there was a large lack in the 50s. They did.
Sure.
There were, and people didn't know about it.
And also in the UK.
So also the tests, we never know what they are doing. They do it and we don't know. So how will they arrive to do it globally? How can we know what they are doing? For example, in Italy, we have an agreement from the government, Italian government, with America, and they can create future climatic situations, and we don't know where, and we don't know how. And universities and research centers are engaged in this type of research, not with a computer, but concretely. So you are all the time in symposiums and conferences, you know much more than we can know because mainstream doesn't tell what happens there. How do you think will they arrive to make a global injection of
I think that if you start to see a crisis, if suddenly there's a tipping effect in the environment, or if suddenly there's a huge drought in the United States, or a huge flood, or huge disasters of some kind, they will simply do it. They won't be shy. They'll go ahead and do it. They will put
So they will start in one moment to make a global action of injection, like Keith.
Well, no, Keith wants to do his experiments for sure.
He wants.
Yeah.
But he has permission because Nagoya.
No, because he's in the United States. He's in Harvard.
Ah, yeah, they're out from the
They're outside. He can go ahead and do it in the United States.
But he cannot do it in Europe.
No, but he can't. But the Russians will probably, even though they signed Nagoya, I have no doubt the Russians will still, somewhere in Siberia or something, they may well do a test. And we won't know that. That's for sure. If it's done in the United States, we'll know about it. I mean, the fact that Keith is trying to get support and financial support to actually do the test is a sign that it hasn't been done yet. The fact that the SPICE program in the UK, they tried to do it. They tried to do a test, and they couldn't do it. Is a sign that there aren't lots of little tests going on like that. They're not.
Do you know Rosalind Patterson?
I've heard the name, but I don't think.
Yeah, she also spoke at the United Nations, and she is a scientist. She's not, and she makes in California a lot of analysis. And fact is that in the soil and in the water there's a lot of barium and aluminium.
Sure.
And she said they are destroying atmosphere because they are just doing it. So they are, also the film from Michael Murphy, I suppose. No? And we know from past they don't tell us what they are doing.
I know, I realize, but
so we need really to look very well what they are doing because we are eating, breathing, and drinking.
Well, the history is, this is 50 years ago that we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah. And governments were prepared 50 years ago to blow up the planet in order to protect their sense of what they thought was democracy. That was the Cold War. Now we have a hot war, the hot war of climate change. And the same governments are prepared to take the same risks on behalf of the rest of the planet and control the planetary thermostat, even though they have no right to. They will do the same thing. I don't deny that, absolutely. But I do think that if in Rio we have not just a weak moratorium, but we have a statement from the United Nations saying we consider geoengineering to be an act of war. We consider the governments who do it are attacking the planet, effectively. Some language like that, then that will cause the United States to be much more cautious. And even Russia and China will be more, especially China will be more careful. I don't know what Russia.
Will you go on with this map to explain more what they are doing?
Well, sorry?
This map will be more perfect into the future?
Oh, yes.
You will go on with it?
We'll keep on adding to it. We have the database on the internet, so we keep on changing it.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So I thank you very much.
Okay.
Scientists generally, because I have a lot of contact also here in Italy, and I see that very often scientists would come out from the projects, you know, because they know very well that maybe the work they are doing is not what they would like to do, and because a lot of research is now connected with projects which are not so clear. It's a very difficult work.
We're not quite sure whether it's geoengineering or it's for some other purpose.
Because every scientist has only a small part, and he can also ignore if he don't want to see, doesn't want to see it.
It's really strange. We deal a lot with nanotechnology, synthetic biology, biotechnology.
Oh, that's the other point. These are nanoparticles.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's
but
not carbon dust like
no, it's very small.
It's very small, and it's very heavy for nature and for us.
Yeah. But the scientists who are involved in those fields all say to us, well, they're so glad that we're concerned about geoengineering because they think geoengineering is really dangerous.
Yeah.
So they think that what they're doing is okay, but geoengineering is bad. And it's strange that way. And geoengineers I've talked to say, gee, synthetic biology is really dangerous, but geoengineering is not so bad. So scientists are very naive.